I'm Leah Pariser, an interviewer for the Holocaust Oral History Project of the Orange County Anti-Defamation League. Today is July 23rd, 1993, and we are interviewing Ida Brookhouse, who is a rescuer from the Holocaust period. Thank you very much for giving us testimony, and we consider it a very precious gift to all of us and to future generations. And Ida, if you would start by telling us about your life before the war and then just continue with the story.
Okay, my name is Ida Brookhouse, as Leah said, and I'm from the Netherlands, and I was about 17 years old when the war broke out. It was a horrifying experience, and especially the Holocaust should never be forgotten. That is why I feel very honored to be here and to put my things in there. We grew up in Amsterdam, and it was a regular neighborhood, Jewish people, Catholic people. We didn't know. I mean, we just played and we went to school together, and that was it. Then when the war broke out, in the beginning, you know, it was just horrible because, boy, the war and the Germans, and it was really bad.
Give us an idea of what you're talking about.
Well, right away they started to change our system. I mean, right away they start saying the Jewish people couldn't live in our streets anymore, but would be rounded up in an area in Amsterdam. And we figured out later on that was easier for them then to get them and ship them off to Germany, to the concentration camps. And we fought it all the way.
In what way did you fight it?
We were trying to help, you know, because we were all in kind of a shock. Another thing that happened right away after the war, lots of Jewish people who had heard what had happened in Germany already for so many years, they committed suicide. Whole families gassed themselves. And I vividly remember the ambulances going through the street, the sirens going, whole families. You know, it was the misery of. I want to tell you also that the war lasted almost 5 days, that was all. And the Germans came in, and right away we have this horrible feeling, you know, what are we going to do? So after this first shock, you kind of settle, and your queen, the queen, you know, she escaped to England. First we were very upset about it, but we very soon understood that was the best way, because she was able to do whatever she could do for us rather than sit and be a prisoner of the Germans. So we listened secretly to the radio, Radio Orange. You know, the house of the Queen is orange, and we called it Radio Orange. And we got messages every night. First of all, we had to bring our radios. We were not allowed to keep our radios. And pretty soon they want our gold, our silver. They want our bicycles. My father had a motor bicycle that he had to give. Cars, anything. If the war had not broken out and we were somehow, you know, involved, like if they were in another country, we were able to feed our people for 5 years. But since the Germans came in, within a year, our warehouses were empty. Everything was shipped to Germany, and pretty soon we started on an ounce of tea a week, half a pound of sugar. In the beginning, that was a lot, you know. No chocolates. Then later on, when the war developed, we were getting coupons for clothes because there was really nothing. You could not wear, there were no shoes, there were no clothes. Everything that we had was shipped to Germany. And we kind of figured that he had to keep his own people going, because he has been doing this already for so many years that now he has to do something to satisfy them, you know. So we fought back in every way we could. We listened to the radio, and there was no way about it. You were going to fight this. You were not just going to sit back and let them, let them do this to you.
How did they take your father's business from him?
Well, my father had a pest control business, and all his stuff that he used came from Yugoslavia. Well, nothing came in anymore, of course. Nothing came in, so there was just no work, So, but we survived. My sister's husband, my husband later, I got married in the war. The men were not able to go out on the street because the Jews were not the only ones that were taken. All the men who were able to work were forced to go to Germany to work in factories. And he had this system. He had this system going. I mean, he took, let's say, 200 workers, and they were prisoners, rather. So they wouldn't be free after work. They would go to a camp and stay there and didn't get any food. And they figured that way they'll last for about 8 months, then they would be starved, and the rest another load would come in. That is how he worked it, Hitler, So in other words, when our men were not supposed to go on the street because they could be being picked up every moment. So the woman, my sister, myself, and I went out. If there was something to get in a store, you have to wait in line for hours to get it. We would stand in line. We would go together with my mother. She would cook whatever there was, and we would all share it. I think this was a very good system that worked for us.
How long do you think you did that?
Well, the first 2 years were not too bad. We were always able to get something somehow. We lived on the outskirts of Amsterdam. But the last years, the last 2 years, and especially the hunger winter, that was really horrible. We had no gas, we had no electricity, we had no heat. So we cooked on little stoves. You can always call it like a little barbecue. And we chipped these little pieces of wood to cook a meal on. But we did it. And at night we would go out and chop a tree down in the streets, just to get wood. We would do everything we could to stay alive. And then the big thing came, of course, when our Jewish neighbors, we had this one particular couple that we really liked. And she came to my father. She knew that my father was right away in the resistance. And she asked him, she had a 7-month-old baby. If anything would happen, would we do something for the baby? And my father said yes. So then they were not able to live in our street anymore, but went to a Jewish section. And then one day we got a phone call from her, and she said, Mr. Asman, whispered my father, the package is ready. We have it ready for you. Will you come and get it? He said, that's fine. So my sister and I went right through the Germans, and we kind of flirted with them. Hi, We went right to their house, and I never forget the face of those two people giving their 7-month-old baby, not knowing what was going to happen. So we took that baby in the carriage, and we went through another street, flirted again with the Germans, and went home with that baby. It is a really long story, but that baby got to us, and she was 7 months old, and she was really terrific. And the father and the mother were sent to the camp the same night. But they stayed in Holland in a camp, which was kind of fortunate. They were kind of privileged, if you can call it that way, because his father was a very well-known professor in Amsterdam and had contributed to history and he was well-known. And so they were kind of privileged to stay in Holland. So we had that baby, and about a year afterwards, maybe 9 months afterwards, we were betrayed. And the Gestapo came to our house and wanted to take that baby. So they told my sister to bring that baby to their headquarters. And we were just all horrified, but we couldn't do anything. And furthermore, we thought that we were not going to see my sister either, because their motto was, if you like the Jews that much, then go with them. Just go with them. So my father went to work right away, and this escape is just absolutely fabulous what happened in the next 2 days, because the little girl was brought to a creche. They call it a creche, where they keep the little babies and the children, and they were waiting for transport. So whenever there was transport, they would, let's say, 30 children go with them, all without parents, because most of them were children whose parents, like the girl from us, had given them to an address, you know, or to somebody in the hope to rescue them. So my sister went to that end of the street, and there was a nurse in that house, a Jewish nurse, who was allowed to take children. See, now and then you caught up on somebody that had a heart, you know. So she was allowed to air the children, kind of more or less. And she came out with that baby in the baby carriage. And my sister kind of joined her at the corner of the street and started walking with her. And at the next corner, the girl disappeared, the nurse disappeared and had to be really disappeared, could not go back to the home, of course. And my sister walked all the way, about a 2-hour walk, to the central station where the trains go. And my mother and I were waiting there, and we took that baby and brought it to a relative from us in the country. And then there's another thing going on. Then when they were there when she was there, we got a message from her parents who were still in the camp in Holland. They bought themselves out, and they were going to a castle in the Netherlands if they had that baby with them. They paid an enormous amount to the Germans. And I have an interview with the mother later on because of the children's sake, but it is in Dutch. And I said to her, why in the world did you believe that the Germans would keep their words? But they did. They said they were so desperate that they gave that money and they went to that castle, and my sister and I had to bring that baby there, you know. So we went by train on a little station. I sat there with the baby, and my sister went down to the castle to check it out. And she met those parents again. And they said, we can sit out the war here, and it looks pretty good, and we want her. We need her, otherwise we cannot stay here. Well, that lasted just 2 months, and then we were shipped off to Theresienstadt in Germany. And they survived, because by now it was only 9 or 10 months before the war was finished. Then after the war, they came back and stayed with my parents till they were able to get on their own. So that is their story, you know.
They were able to take the baby with them to
They took another child and they took another baby there that they had met who was there without anybody, and they kind of adopted it. And they later found the mother of that baby. They found the mother of that baby, yes. And there are overall it is a sad situation, because in 1943, I remember, that was the big razzia, they call it, you know, when they round up all the Jewish people in Amsterdam. And that one night, they took almost 6,000 Jews in Holland, you know, rounded them up. But my father always got a message, there's going to be something going on tonight. They came usually like at 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning. When my father had time enough, he would send us and the baby. We also had about 4 or 5 boys. They were not Jews, but they were kept away, and they did underground work also. So we had always a house full with people who were not supposed to be there. So he would send us out of town, which was about half an hour walk, and we would stay on the cemetery the whole night till this thing was over, and then we would come home again. But that particular night, he could not, it was too late. They already had posted there, the Germans were sitting, so we couldn't go, and we did not know what to do. So my father told us that we were not supposed to go to bed. We were going to play cards, he said, because if we hear the trucks coming, we are better able to handle, you know, than when we get waken up and we don't know what to do. So that is what we did, and it was 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. By 3 o'clock we said, well, probably nothing, you know, probably, you know, some alarm. And by 4 o'clock, here they come, you know. And what they did, that is how they usually do it, and I've seen that many times. They would roll in the trucks down the street, and they have those big microphones, and they tell the Jews to come out, you know, come out, you know. And I saw my next door neighbor, and he was not fast enough, so they kicked him off the stairs. The man was 62 or 63 years old. And they just shoved him and kicked him. I mean, you know, there is no other way that I don't think animals even do things like that, you know, in those cars. And after they had rounded those all up, then they came through the houses, and they said, did you hide the Jews? Because if you hide them, you can go with them if you like them that much, And we heard them next door and we heard them above us because we are all living in apartment kind of buildings. It's not houses. And my father did not, and at the very last minute he got this bright idea, and I have told this story over and over on my children. This was so unbelievable. He put his fishing equipment in the hallway. And I worked for the Mitropa, which was an international train car that goes through Europe, like the Orient Express. And I worked at their office. They were originally from Germany. I worked in their office on the central station. And in order to get into the central station, I needed a paper, and they called that an Ausweis, And that was, it's a German word. So my father said, give me yours. So he put those things, and then because everybody has a personal paper. You need a personal paper. But he put that of mine from the office. It had Ausweis. So they call on the door, and they shouted, and they shoot, and they shoot through the ceilings to see if you were hiding in between there or whatever. My mother fainted. My sister and I were with the baby in one bed, and the boys all were scrambled around because we did not know what or where to do. So the minute that they bonked on the door, my father opened the door, and before they could say anything, he started, and he spoke German well. So he said to them, what in the world are you doing? This is my day that I'm going out fishing. I've taken the day off. I've got it all set up. My friends are, and I cannot get out of here. What is the matter with you guys? And this guy started, Mr. Osman, don't you worry. He says, half an hour, we're all done, and you go fishing. Good night. I'll never, ever, ever forget how we got through that one, because if they had come in, it would have been a disaster, a real disaster. Yeah, so I remember that very well. Is there anything
Your father was very resourceful.
Very resourceful, and we were all determined. I have been asked this question many times, that you think you would not do, but you do. If you see all this misery around you, you help. I mean, there is no other way, I have seen them throwing pregnant Jewish women in cars. The cruelty of all this is, to me, unbelievable. I mean, if you want to fight a war and you need cannons or rifles, or go and do it. But to fight a war against, and then coming into Germany and then think about it, separate them. The mothers and old mothers go right away to the gas chambers, because that is how it went, That is how it went. And men, if they were able to work, okay, you can work till you drop dead, So you do something. You're not just going to sit there, and not help,
How did you know all this? Did you know this during the war? Did people come back and tell you stories?
No, but don't forget, a lot of German Jews already before, like from 1935 to 1940, tried to come into the Netherlands, and they needed visas to get in there, but lots of them were able to come in. We heard the stories already then. That is why a lot of Jews killed themselves when the war broke out, because they knew those stories. And we have said many times afterwards, maybe they were better off doing that than going through all these terrible things that happened in the camps, And my father was picked up a couple of times, but he was just sitting there in jail for a week, too, and they couldn't get a hold on him, so he came back, So that was really a miracle.
You mentioned that you had other people that were coming through that your father got papers for. Can you tell us about that?
Well, my father was in the resistance, and when you find an address for people who are willing to hide, people, they need extra food. Because there was a shortage of food, and, they needed false papers in case, So he was always busy getting those papers and getting the food stamps and getting the coupons. And then my sister and I were supposed to bring, he said that they were bills from his business, But we brought them. We brought them here and we brought them there. And we later on realized that is what we were doing, Yeah, and I met those people when I came to Holland in '89 to get that medal, I met those people there, and they said, "Are you John Esmond's daughter?" "Yes, I am." "Well, how marvelous, because you saved my life." And it was to me unbelievable that could happen, you know. And then we were televised. And I don't know how many phone calls I got, because they saw my picture, and I have this picture, and I will get it later on, with the baby, and they recognized the baby and me, and I got those phone calls. It was just unbelievable, unbelievable. So, and then with all this, so you help, you know, there is no two other ways that you help. Then the neighbor that I mentioned that was kicked off the stairs by the Germans, his son was picked up about 3 months prior to that, just off the street, you know. And my name is Ida, and his name was Isaac, yeah. But they called him Eat, and they called me Eat too. And she had a silver cigarette box that she let me have it. She said, because you were his friend, and I still have that box. And when you are interested in that, I would like to give that to the museum, because I think that is where it should be. You know, there is nobody left of that family.
Could you tell us a little bit about these pictures that were...
Yeah.
I should let you see.
Yeah, see,
let me show the book first so people know what we're looking at.
Yeah. That is how the Netherlands were in the years 1940 till 1945, the during of the Second World War in Holland. See, this already started here to see that right away they put up a Jewish section, you know. So we never had that, of course, in Holland. They started out with they couldn't go into parks. Then they started they couldn't go in streetcars, concerts, anything. They could never. And then they started to round them up and put them in one section of the Netherlands. That's Amsterdam. My father said that is what they do, because then right away, you know, if they have them rounded up that way, that is, you know, they just have to go and get them there rather than when they're spread out over the city. So yeah, that is what they did there. Yeah, this is a little, that is a little village in the Netherlands. And some of the Gestapo who took over there in that city had this bright idea that nobody in that village was supposed to be Jewish. Jews were not supposed to live there. And here you can see that they forced them to wear the star. You know, and we have often wondered, why do you do all this? Don't put on that star. But they were so scared, you know, they were so scared that is what they did. They took all our buildings, of course, you know, they took all our beautiful paintings, Rembrandt paintings, they took our silver, they took everything, everything. Yeah, there is also, I have to say that lots of the people here, see, that is how they made them take blankets. They made them believe, you know, that they were survived the war. But the minute they came in the camp, all these belongings were taken from them, you know. And it is true that they even, you know, after the gas chambers, they took their gold teeth and everything out. You know that, and that is true. And we have seen many of those transports, because, like I said, I worked in the central station. And when we knew that the transport was going to Germany, they would bring those people, the Jewish people, up with trucks to the station and put them all in those. Yeah, it's not like sitting. I mean, they stuffed them all in there. And then when the train finally left, we found all those little notes on the tracks. You know, tell that and that I'm gone, or tell, and that is what we used to bring around, you know, to bring it around. So what I want to say is that every day you're confronted with the cruelty of the Nazi system, you know. So every day you have this tremendous anger that you want to do something. You have to do something, you know.
It's the part that is so hard is that why some people did something and some people didn't.
Well,
I hear from you saying you had to do something.
Yeah, you had to do.
But you had to do something. Why didn't someone else? And that's what we don't understand.
Well, we have, you know, there are about, I believe that there are about 10,000 resistance people who are killed and in camps and killed on the streets or shot to death by the Germans or anyhow. I think that the majority fought them. The majority, but you always have people who go with the crowd, who thought that they would get better from it. You know, I don't think that they believe in Nazism, but they believe, you know, that they could maybe get a job from them, or maybe they could get food or whatever. You know, I think that they were weak people. You know, so yeah, and then of course you had a lot of young girls who went with the German soldiers, and I have witnessed that too. When the war was over, they cut their hair off, they got them, and then they with tar, they put the swastika right on their heads, and I have seen that too. And you know, when you're a good person, even that hurts you. I didn't want to stand there and watch that, although I was pretty mad, but I did not get the satisfaction out of that. I did not believe in that either, you know. But you always have people that will go over and think that they're getting better. But the majority fought back. You don't want to lose your freedom, Leah, ever. You don't want to lose your freedom ever. So you do everything, you know, to maintain that.
Would you spell your maiden name for us so we can get your father's name down properly? His name was?
Assman. John was his real name, not John, but John. And his last name was Assman. John Assman. Yeah. And my father was we are really Dutch. I mean, you know, people don't run you over like that, you know. And Hitler's methods are so horrible. I mean, so horrible. Because it's all, they wanted the whole world. He really wanted, you know, he went into Belgium and into France and into the Netherlands. And from there on, he was going to go jump England. And if he had England, then he was going to go to the United States, you know. Well, things like that. I remember when the war broke out, it lasted 5 years, but every month we would say, they're coming to get us. We could not believe that the Americans would not come and do something about it. I remember that strictly. And I have talked to people like where he talked about that dinner, and they said, yeah, but we never, you know, we never realized, like I think that we now don't realize what's happening there in Bosnia, and then we did not have the televisions either. We were not confronted like we were in this time and age, you know, with the confrontation of seeing what's happening in Bosnia or like what in Iraq, you know, with Kuwait, what happened there. We were able to see that right away on TV. But in those years, America was so far away, you know, and they were really good. And I remember talking about the Germans, and, you know, because it is in your system, and my little one was, about 7 years old, and we went on vacation to the Netherlands. And my brother-in-law says, why don't you take my car and drive into Germany? We were not very happy ever, you know. And I hate to say this, but up till now, I have the language kind of, you know, and I don't want to bring this over to my children, but I think it will die with me. But I will never get rid of that feeling. So we said, oh, okay, you know, so we took the car and we went along the Rhine, which is really very beautiful. And we went into Germany, and we were there about half an hour in, and we decided to stop and have something to drink. And my little one says, are we now in the country of the bad guys? And we looked at each other and we said, do you realize what we have done? We have brainwashed this child, you know. But we turned around and we went back home. But, you know, you don't realize it, but you do, you know, you do.
Were you born in Amsterdam?
Yes. Yes.
Could you describe what a day was like while the Germans were there? You got up in the morning. How did you conduct a normal day?
You conduct a normal day by saying that it would only last another month and then they would be gone. That was the conversation. A normal day would be kind of go to work, try that you get to see how to get your food together, you know. Then the railroad stopped. We could not use that anymore. How to get through a day food-wise.
How did you get food?
Like I said, my sister and I were standing in line, and we did it together. We did it together. We lived on the outskirts. My sister and I were also able to go to local farms and sometimes get something. But have you heard of sugar beets? Okay, we ate those. That was that we made everything out of sugar beets. We boiled them and we make syrup of it, you know. We had some chickens, and we did have some chickens. So that was kind of nice.
Was there any other incident where, like the one where the Nazis came to your door, was there anything else like that happened that...
Well, that was something really the main thing, and that day that the baby was taken away from us, that was really bad. And then I remember another day when they...
When you say the baby was taken away?
When my sister had to bring her
to the...
And then we got her out. That was a really big thing. And then I remember also a day that they came to the door and kept my father. And I was so...
What excuse did they use? Why did
they wanted to talk to him.
Oh.
That was what they said. You have to come to headquarters. We have to talk to you, you know. And I was so mad, you know. And I said to my mother, tell him that Dad is old. We don't want. And my mother was so horrified, so she told my sister, keep her, because otherwise they're going to take her too. But I was so mad, and there were Dutch guys who came and got my father, the wrong ones, of course. So I went there and I told them, I said, don't you have a father? I remember this clearly. Don't you have a father? What were you going to do if it was your father? My father hasn't done anything, and we need my father, you know, and this and that. And my father told me later, he went on the street with them, he walked in between, and he heard one say to the other, I am not going to do this anymore. They did not tell us that is what we were supposed to do when we joined. I'm not going to do. So, you know, that was kind of something. I also remember a very bad thing, that one day I went to work and I took the streetcar to work. It is about 3/4 of a drive is a streetcar, you know, from where I lived to. And in the middle of the town, in the middle of Amsterdam, the streetcar was stopped, and we were all supposed to go out. So we all went out to this little, how do you call this? A little park, you know, right in the middle of the street park where you walk through. And they had about 18 young men, not Jews, young kids that they had picked up, and they were in jail for maybe they were rude to the Germans or whatever, you know. And some German general was killed, you know, shot to death in God knows where. And as a punishment for that, they took those 18 guys and shot them to death right there in the park. And we all came like this, and they took their how do you call those, rifles, and they put our hands down, so we were there, and we had to stand there for 20 minutes and look at them. I remember that also very clearly. See, so how could you not hate them? How could you not hate them? You know.
The other thing that they claim is a lot of people were afraid, you know, afraid of their own lives.
Of course, but I don't know. Yeah, you are afraid of your home, but you are already so, you know, you don't have the food. You cannot go out at 8 o'clock at night. You cannot, there was no candles, there were no light. I mean, the living conditions were so miserable. What could be more miserable than, you know, so you wanted them out. You wanted them out, and you believed that freedom was around the corner. For 5 years, we believed that freedom would eventually come.
Describe how freedom did come.
Unbelievable.
What was it like? Did the Nazis just suddenly leave, or did you hear?
No. After the invasion, which was in 44, right, in 44, the southern part of the Netherlands was freed by Canadians and Americans and Englishmen. But they could not get over the River Rhine. I don't know whether you have read that book, A Bridge Too Far. That is the battle there on the Rhine and every. So the western part, which was Amsterdam, of course, you know, we had this what we called the hunger winter. That was the worst winter because there was really, people were starving by the dozens every day. And there was no, it was winter, very bad winter. We could not bury them either because the grounds were so frozen up. This happened in the Netherlands. We were so cultural. I mean, it was not some way back country where, you know, it was just unbelievable, you know. We were not supposed to go out at 8 o'clock at night, you know. We had no lights. My oldest son was born in that winter. And all the neighbors brought candles so that I had some light. Whatever was left of a piece of candle, you know, and that is how he was born, you know. So that was he was born in November 44, and it was people, we were middle-class people. But people in our street starved from starvation, you know, or the mothers would give whatever they had to the children and would starve themselves. You know, there is a picture in that book also that you saw. And that is common sense. The bodies were piled up in the church waiting for burial. There were no more horses. There were no more cars, of course. So how would you do it, you know? How would you do it? And at the end of the war, because there is another side too, there's another funny story. When we would go out in the daytime and go to we lived on the outskirts, so a little bit further down the road you might find a farm or know somebody that they had something to eat or so, you know, so you would go out. But sometimes if the woman had children, the man said, well, I'll go and see if they there, then I'll come back, you know. And we're by my mother in the street, and we heard a scream, and this woman comes, and she said, oh my God, my husband went on the bicycle to try to get some food, and they were standing there waiting, and they have all those guys, so here they come, you know, and they are all on the bicycles, so they drive up. And we said, oh my God, well, you know, the war won't last long. He'll make it, you know. We're all standing there talking to her, and you know, and here he comes around the corner by himself on his bicycle. My God, what happened to you? He said, well, I was at the end of the line, and there were Germans on bicycles also. The Germans were so poor at the end themselves. You know, they didn't have anything anymore. When the Canadians and the Americans came to our country, can you imagine? But we saw real men. Those were all, they were skeletons, you know. Those guys were in the beautiful uniforms and big bomber jackets and everything. And those Germans, because some of the Germans, a lot of good Germans, you know, were there, and they were forced to do these things. So anyhow, they went on this row, and they bicycled around, and he said he was at the end. And when he came to a street, a side street, he put his hand out, and he went just in that street. He said, I swear that I felt that bullet going through my body, but nobody knows. So he came home. I mean, a miracle. A miracle.
A brave man.
Yeah, but he said he knew, what can I do? Rather shoot me now or whatever, you know. So I mean, those things do happen also, you know. And we had another neighbor lady who lived with a man, and she was Jewish, but nobody really knew. She was the most beautiful woman you've ever seen. And one day he came down to my mother's house, and he said, I don't know what happened to her. She's gone. And that was not, you know. And what had happened to her, he got a note from her out of prison the same day. She was a beautiful woman, and we figured that she was betrayed by somebody, you know, or whatever. And they came to her door and told her, we figured you had a radio, and there's no problem. Come and bring the radio to the station. And he never heard from her anymore. So we kept going to the prison to get her clothes, and she smuggled little notes in there. And we did that for about a month, and then she was shipped off to Germany. We never ever. And he sent men, he was a well-to-do man, he sent his agents, he had agents working for him, all through Germany, never ever one word.
What happened after the war? What did your family do?
After the war was it was a very disorganized situation, you know, because first of all you have still the anger to all the bad Dutch people. So there were shootings going on, and they were made prisoners, and they were put in camps, and then they had to sort out, and it was just a chaos, or what you call it. It was, you know, and the food would still the food there was, because we had no railroads left, we have no, and then the Swedish people threw bread and food packages out over Amsterdam. Yeah, and I remember how we saw those things coming down. Yeah, that was right after the war. Yeah, they did that. And then my family, my husband's family, was in the southern part of the Netherlands, tried to get through because they figured we were all dead by now, you know. So 2 of my brother-in-laws made it through. They worked for the Red Cross, and they came through, and they brought us food. And it was all those rations that the soldiers have. And we were all so sick that night because nobody could eat that stuff anymore. You know, we really had to build. I was 80 pounds after the war. 80 pounds. And my baby was fine because they thought, you know, I breastfed him, but he was fine and I weighed 80 pounds. So, okay, we made it through, you know, no problem.
Now, your family has been acknowledged by the Christian rescuers,
yes,
and you've brought some things to share with us.
Yeah, I'm very grateful for that. The only regret I have is that my father hasn't been able to get that acknowledgement. But that is how it goes, you know. He would have been 110 years old, I think, by now.
Now, if you could tell us about this picture.
Yeah. When I was in Israel about 3 years ago, you know, through the rescuers, which I'm forever grateful, we unveiled a plaque on the wall for my father and mother, and for my sister and myself. So that was very emotional and very nice. And in that same vacation, I was made an honorable citizen from Israel, and I was handed that medallion by the mayor of Tel Aviv. It was a beautiful, beautiful, emotional ceremony. Yes. Yes. And I remember saying that I thought they do too much. But I think it was him who said to me, listen, for every Jew that you saved, they were able to start a new family. So we are very grateful. And I am grateful that not that they are grateful, but that we get together. You know, that is what I'm trying to say. This is the father. The girl I don't have. This is the mother and the father from the little girl that we rescued. And this boy is a cousin of this man, is a cousin of mine. And his parents lived in the country and had that girl for about 4 months before we had to, And this is the brother of that girl in Israel that we met there. It was very emotional, very emotional. Yeah, and through him, I will be able to get some letters like they sent from the camp. He has them, and he will mail them to me.
And he lives in Israel?
He lives in Israel, yes. And I have the most admiration for the people who live there and what they make out of their lives, you know. That is fantastic.
And this is the medal from
the Netherlands? Yes, this is the medal from the Netherlands that was given to me by an, can't get on the name, the representative of Israel. Yeah, he came there and, he gave me that medal. That is where all the things happened, that the people came to me and we were televised and, They have that in French. This is olive wood. This is made from olive wood. Yeah. And it says in the back that was given to us for my father, who was the main person, and my mother, who undoubtedly has sweat many tears and you know, have worried and did all those things, and for my sister and myself, because we were what you call the couriers, you know, but I'm very grateful for that. But like I say, for my father, most of all. And I'll do it again. If something would happen, I'll do it again. because you know the story of Anne Frank. And I I know it was that way. But I always think there were thousands like her. There were thousands like her, but they were not able to tell their story, And this was given to me by Yad Vashem, when we had the plague, yeah. Very, very nice. Also very emotional. Yeah, that's Yad Vashem. Have you been in Yad Vashem? It is unbelievable, huh? Did you see the car, the train car that they still have there? Yes. I was not able to go into the children's section. I could not handle that. Yeah. And that was given to me by, also there in Israel, yeah, that was given to me by Israel, yeah. And those, they call us the rescuers. And they ask me many times, would we have done it? And I told you, maybe I told you again, you would, because if you see the people that you live with and play with and see them being beaten up and even now you would jump in, and do something about it. So you do it. I have the most admiration for the Americans because they have lost so many people. They have lost so many boys in all those wars, you look at Vietnam, 65,000 boys are killed, but they never, thank God, have the enemy come on their own soil and do things to their mothers and their children and their wives. And that is where the hatred comes in. You really hate. I thought that I would never be able to say that I hate anything or anybody, but I could not believe the unthinkable crimes that the Nazis did to the human race. I cannot. The Jewish, of course, but also, 20,000 Christian guys, they were shot in the streets. And they were brought out to the dunes and shot, and they were tortured, and they were, so cruel. And also to women, and to children. I cannot justify that ever. And I get very upset when people don't believe that it ever happened, And more than getting upset, I am aware that we have to make sure that it will be never forgotten, that it will never, because look at those people nowadays, what they don't know what they're talking about. They have no idea what is going on. They live in a free country, and they can eat and they can do whatever they want. But if you're tortured for 5 years, and everything has been taken away from you, my father took all the silver and the gold and buried it in the backyard. And my mother thought that we were all going to be killed for that. That is, we're talking about fear. See, if you let yourself intimidate, do it. I can understand fear, because now that I have children myself, I can understand. But then we said, no, we're not going to give that. We're going to dig a hole in the backyard, and that is where we kept it all. Not that we have that much, but the rings, my mother's rings, the silver, we had some silver dishes and stuff, and all in the backyard. And lots of people did that, And what do you think of the courage of people to have a secret radio? And, Germans had special cars and tanks to find out where we were. Where they were broadcasted, or where they were listening to radio, Remember that Churchill once made a speech and he said, and we shall, and nobody was supposed to have a radio in the Netherlands, but the next day everybody in Amsterdam was like this, so that is amazing, and it gives you a good feeling. I have to say that many people in the war were closer than we have ever been or ever will be again, because you had a thing to fight for, and that is what you did.
The little child that you had with you, how did she finally fare? When you gave her to the parents, Tell us that again a little bit.
She was in that castle, and she went with her parents to Theresienstadt for 7 or 8 months, and they came back from that. And beautiful, beautiful. Her father was a judge. It took him a while to get back on his 2 feet. Through his father, we are acknowledged, because the man had only one thing in life. He was so grateful that through us they came through, that was his main life. He was going to see that things would be right, you know. And he was a wonderful man. So through him, I got acquainted with all the other things, you know. Yeah, they made out beautiful. And I told you they took that other little girl back to him. That is also a story. I have stories that it's unbelievable. They came back, and they were brought back. See, when they came from the camps, they brought them with trucks to the Netherlands, to a central point. And if they had family left, or relatives, or like a neighbor like us, they would contact them, and then otherwise they had to go again in a camp in Holland, and they were taken well care of. But they had to have, because you know what those Germans did. They took those people out of their houses, you know, and then 2 days later they came with trucks and took all the furniture and everything what they had, you know, and they took that and shipped that, so they had nothing left, you know. So those people had us, and they came to us with that little girl. And finally, they were both about 2 years or 3 years or so. And I remember those 2 kids coming in our house, and what is this, Grandma? They used to call my mother Grandma. They didn't know what a chair was or a table. They had no idea, you know. And then about a week later, there was a woman coming on the door, and the minute she saw that girl, that was her girl. And you would not believe that story either. She and her husband tried to go underground, and she gave the baby to an organization. She also had a little boy. She gave both children to them, but they were never allowed to know where those children were, because, you know, so the little girl was somewhere in Amsterdam and was picked up and came in the camp and luckily came back. The little boy, they didn't know what happened to that little boy, and I tell you what happened to that little boy. But she worked in a boarding house. The people gave her a job, you know. She had like a hiding, and she could work there, you know. And after the war, those people also did a lot for Jewish people. So there were people who coming from the camps into Amsterdam, gave that address of that boarding house and came there. And when they came back, this woman said, "There is my little girl and my little boy. Have you seen? Is there a girl?" And then one man said, "Well, there was a couple who went to Amsterdam and they had a little girl." But to make a long story short, that was the girl. She walked about 120 miles to come to our house and found out that that was her girl. That was not totally all roses and moonlight, because it was a lot of things going on. Now the organization went further back and tried to trace that little boy. You know what happened to that little boy? He went to the southern part to Holland, which was set free 7 months earlier, and came by a Catholic family. And when their war was over, I mean, when they thought, you know, and anybody showed up, they figured, parents are gone, he's ours, you know. So when they finally made contact, it was about 4 months, you know, after she discovered where they found him. He was so sorry that she came, because he was just going to do his Holy Communion. I mean, you know, this is another unbelievable story. The headaches and the pain and the heartaches afterwards, you know, before they were all, you know, got back together. That it is unbelievable what the damage was done in those 5 years, one way or the other.
Did all those people stay in Holland, or did they all eventually leave Amsterdam?
I think, no, there's a very nice Jewish community right now, but lots of them, especially the younger ones, went to Israel, yes. And but one son is in Israel, and they're very successful right now. The kids go back to school, they have become very successful, and this family is doing outstanding, really good. No, Amsterdam, there is something about Amsterdam. Once you've got your roots there, you know, you just can't let go. But we lost this. We had, like we had before the war, this Jewish community where my father used to go there. There was only, for my father, there was only one address where he could get his pickles and his stuff, and that is where he would go. And he would come home with fabulous stories and stuff like that. My father was a true Amsterdammer, you know, a very old Amsterdam family. So no, they do get established, and they're scattered over. I don't think that they did not. The younger ones, of course, to go to Israel. You know,
Doesn't sound like you want to go back to live there either, though.
I have nobody there anymore. I have just one brother left, and I know. No, we went out after the war. Like I said, the government kind of encouraged people to immigrate, because then whoever was left had a better chance, you know, of starting and building a new country. Don't forget, we did not have streetcars and anything, but the railroads were gone too, because they need the iron. They absolutely plundered us. You know, they melted down the iron, so for all of a sudden the train couldn't go any further anymore, or stuff like that. So the building up of the Netherlands took a long time, you know, a long time. And
so your family went to...
My husband and my oldest son, we went to Australia.
Yeah, but your father and mother...
Stayed.
They stayed.
They were, by now, they were 56, 57 years old. In those days, that was old, you know, that was old. Yeah.
And then I think you told me earlier that you weren't as comfortable in Australia, and you managed...
No, we went to Australia, and it was a beautiful country and a big country and a really pretty country, but we were not welcome. And I told you, I understand. I fully understand, because they were a very easygoing people. If they did not finish a job today, they'll finish it tomorrow. But now all those immigrants are not only from the Netherlands, but from Belgium, displaced persons, you know, like from Poland and from Italians, Greeks. They all come, ships full, and there is a housing problem, you know, where are you going to live? We live in a chicken house. It sounds very bad, but actually we were one of the lucky ones. We made it comfortable, you know. But now the Australian begins to wonder, what is all this, you know? Overtime, they don't want to work overtime, you know, and stuff like that. So this was very hard for them to accept us, and it was, for me, it was hard to live in a country where I was not entirely welcome. Like I wanted my boy, I was 7 years old, and to join the Boy Scouts, and I got a phone call that if he would join the Boy Scouts, they were going to kick him or do something. I mean, it was very minor, but to me, coming out of a war, it was serious. You know, it was serious. And I tried to find a job. My husband had got a job from the government, because we went on that government program. But I tried to find a job, and they were very nice to me, but they honestly told me, I'm sorry, but if we can get an Australian, we take an Australian. Understandable. And then we lived in a little village, and I found a job that they call a milk bar. Well, it is where you make ice cream shakes and where you make sandwiches for the kids who go to school. And he said he would take me, and he looked very good, and he was very nice, and I could walk it, and I was delighted. And the same night I got a phone call, please don't come in, because they had told them to throw in your windows if you take on a foreigner. So we made up our mind that we didn't want to live that way. And I have to honestly say that since I'm in the United States, has ever anybody made me feel not welcome. You know, I think this is the greatest country on earth. I really, really, honestly do.
Where did you come to in the United States?
We had friends. This friend is the man that I married now, that were our neighbors in the Netherlands. And when we had, my mother, this one street, you must understand, my mother lives in the down floor somewhere there, my sister lived there, and I lived there. And I had the third story with an attic, you know, and my father had made us a wonderful hiding place. So this man, my father and mother's neighbor, sometimes when my father knew that there was going to be a shook-up, he and his wife would come up and sit with us, and when the truck would roll in, they would dive into that hiding place. That is where we told what we were going to do after the war. You know.
So that's why you all came to America. Yes.
Yeah.
At this point, it concludes our interview.
Okay.
And I really, on behalf of the Holocaust Oral History Project of the Orange County Anti-Defamation League, thank you so very much. And I know in your case especially, we really appreciate the effort for you to come all the way from Valencia to here. And you will get a copy of the tape, and hopefully that will be meaningful to your family also.
It will be very meaningful to this man there in Israel.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And I thank you for having me.
Oh,
I think it is very,
so
very important
pleased.
that we keep this going.
Thank you
Thank you
so
very
much
much.
again.